Good evening, race fans, and welcome to the second installation of the Herd Summer Racing League. Tonight we will have 36.3 kilometres on the flat terrain of TikTok, where we'll have 2 laps. What's going to make tonight slightly more interesting is, as well as the 25 points on offer for the GC riders, we are also going to have 3 separate sprints, one in the lead-in and then one on each of the 2 laps, and 25 points will be on offer for those as well. Just going to quickly switch over to Jake Sanderson to find out what his tactics will be in this race.
Well, James, you said the magic word sprint. I think that's going to be very appropriate here. This is going to be flat, furious, fast. I can't see anybody getting away from a big group, especially with the cat element added in where they should be working together, really. So I'm braced for an exciting finish. With the addition of these sprint points, obviously there's 2 laps, so there's 2 sets of sprint points. Theoretically, a good sprinter here could overtake a GC rider in the overall standings if they played this tactically. So will people be trying to get the best overall finish on GC? Will they be saving themselves for the 2 sprints every lap? Very interested to find out. I know we may see some beta testing for tomorrow's European midday ride that me and James were talking about earlier. So very, very exciting and very, very unpredictable. We were talking about this earlier. Absolutely no clue in terms of which category or which rider is going to be near the finish or at the finish. And it's literally up for grabs. So, Gordon, do you have any predictions? You have any ideas?
No, I think it'll be pretty much as you suggest there, fast and furious as normal, but whether some people will hold back, keep some efforts for the sprints, because I think that will certainly add up to the overall points in the race. If we just cut back to maybe the live action in the moment, we're on Cat D is just leaving the pen at the moment. Looks like we've got about 70 odd riders, so another big field. Quite as crazy as the rest. But bonus sprint on the lead. Didn't enough spit. Got a normal pace. I reckon the sprints might split up a wee hard for any flat. The advantages group. You'd have to have a lot higher wattage to get away from any sort of. Further around the lap, there's maybe a couple of opportunities to get out on a slight uphill coming out, and then also again coming back into the desert out the water, the slight inclines, which might be a point where people attack, but time will tell. Sprints will be the most interesting point to look at in this race, but at the moment I'm following Stefan. Looks like he's in the road. Riders way up ahead. Skip up with them and nicely, but give it a
Yeah, thanks a lot, Gordon. So some of the Paul and they've been out on the so I know we've got for to see how and let's quickly just switch. We're approaching the sprint.
ahead of them. Looks like they're not even managed to get how far from the sprint are 800 meters to go. They do try how much the sprint, I reckon, could be a big advantage if you go for the sprints and not just the GC. But at the moment, this course, it's a good course for Stefan. He's good at the TT, just laying down the power for a long time. But just as we approach from the 500 metre line now to the sprint, start of the official sprint section, which this is a longer sprint. I think probably the longest sprint on Zwift at 500 metres. So It's a bit of a challenge how you pace it. You can't just go all out full gas, which looking at so far, I'm not seeing any big numbers. Certainly no going up to the red. This is Cat D, obviously, so they might not go quite so high, but there's no one jumping up really beyond about 3 to 4 watts. So it looks like they're all playing it safe so far. I suspect some of them might not realise that sprint points counting as well here. So time will tell. At the moment, Stefan has actually gone right onto the front. He's in first place. He is pushing 4 watts a kilo here now, so that possibly might be enough to get a good result in the sprint with the riders behind. Doesn't look like they're pulling, so looks good. Whoever he manages to break the group and get away, there's a few splits in the group now. He's got 5 or 6 were riders with him, but so far I'd say not many riders went full gas on that sprint, so definitely an advantage for later riders to try and hit those sprints and grab some points, because it's not just GC that's going to be the outcome of this race, certainly. But yeah, we should be starting going with the Cat DCs, I would have thought, next, which will be the next challenge, wherever anyone catches. As I said, on this flat course, I think it'll be hard for anyone to catch and groups to get away, so it'll be interesting to see if the other riders catch up as well, as we've seen on previous weeks, which has made quite a difference. When the faster groups come through, they also help the slower groups by pulling them along. But at the moment, we've settled back down. Stefan's doing very well. He's in the front group, 3rd place at the minute, and I suspect it's going to remain like this for the rest of the desert. And very hard to get away on this sort of flat terrain, but time will tell, and we'll see.
Thanks, Gordon. We're just 20 seconds away from the start of the C category, so that'll be for Ed Finney and Paul Husak. I'm following Paul tonight, Ed the man on the course, so 10 seconds to go before the normal crazy takeoff, and then we'll have about 2 kilometres to ride before the first sprint. I can see Paul's already putting down big numbers in the pen, and off he goes. And he's taken straight to the front, so he's not hanging around at all. He's joined by a few other riders now as we just pass the line to kick off the timer. Jake, are we still expecting things from Kevin tonight?
I can confirm Kevin KOM Frud is in the pen, so we have our man on the our B man, sorry, on the course to watch and try and get some excitement to see how the Bs approach this. If they work together, try and act as a cohesive unit and catch the Cs and the Ds ahead, or if they're as tends to happen with the Bs, they sort of start to play games and try and keep a bit left for the ending, when you might see that the A riders come up and sweep them up. So, yeah, very interesting. But Kevin's got about 4 minutes on the clock now till he kicks off. And we were talking tactics earlier. It's really a tough course to try and get away from. And I think he thinks as well, that the best tactic for this is going to be to try and sit in and just try and thin the field out with big numbers and try and hold on for as long as possible for the inevitable sprint at the end for the GC points. So we'll be interested to catch that, and in about 3.5 minutes we'll see more. I think we've got other people such as Max the Power Szymanski and Toby Pedelaire Zuri. So very interested to see how those big names sort of interact, if they're going to work together, or if they're going to
I've actually had some insider information that Toby Zuri is actually watching the race from his sofa, so he's got his feet up tonight after racing 3 times last weekend. So I think Toby's taking it easy, but Max is always a big contender in these sort of races, flat or hilly. In terms of the Cs, we're just round the first kilometre, but let's quickly switch over to our man on the course, Ed Finney. Ed, how's the start gone for you?
Well, I'm off the back of the main group, me and about 4 guys. They're pushing 4.8 watts up there, and a little rough. Still trying to get my legs under me. But we'll keep churning it out. Back to you, James.
Thanks, Ed. Keep pushing, and I expect things to, depending on how this first sprint goes, things could break up pretty early, which will be quite a pleasant surprise on this very, very flat course. We normally see extremely large groups and no massive action until the end. So a bit of activity early on with this sprint, which we're just going over the line now. Are we going to see any big numbers? Not looking like it at the start. But yeah, no, it's looking like most people are relatively content. Although Paul's pushing out 300-400 watts, so he's giving it a little bit of welly. just about halfway through the sprint now, about 200, 250 to go. Paul's still doing about 300, 400 watts up towards the front of this group, currently in sixth spot with a couple riders up front as well. I can see Jeff Pearson's in there as well, but no real activity in the first sprint.
James, just to interrupt there, James. So a sprint like this longer sprint, how would you, as a sprinter, pace this one if you were in Paul's situation to score points? What do you think the best bet is for these sorts of sprints?
So from my point of view, I can't sprint for that long. My 1 minute power isn't fantastic. I'm generally okay over the last 150, 200 meters. So I probably personally, as by no means an expert at all, I'd push relatively hard for the first probably 250, 300 and then stand and give it everything I can to the end. But obviously, if you're having to do this 3 times and try and stay in the peloton, obviously it can be quite tricky.
Sounds very fair. Gordon, over to you.
Yep, back to catching in with Stefan briefly. So he's lost touch a wee bit from that front group. There's sort of 5 or 6 riders ahead of him. They all look quite strong. I think they're averaging probably 3 watts a kilo or even a bit more. So certainly strong if they are D riders. So Stefan at the moment's finding himself in a bit split between group. Although that might suit him. I mean, he's very good at TT type efforts, just laying down the power and keeping it going. So he's going along at nearly 300 watts. So he's certainly putting down the power. And there's a few riders behind, but they are now 40 seconds back. So it'll be an interesting choice what he thinks he wants to do, whether he wants to sit up and wait for them or thinks he can hold it and just TT for the rest of the race, because there's a lot of riders behind, but they're split about 40 seconds. A large group about a minute back. So time will tell. If I was him, I'd maybe sit up a wee bit and keep some energy for the sprints. But if you can hold that gap with the power he's laying down, then keep it going, because he's first place on GC, I would have thought, if he keeps this up. But back for the sprints will be an interesting one. I think, like James has said, sit up and go a wee bit harder at the start of the sprint set, hammer it as much as you can for the last couple of 100 metres.
Just quickly cutting, Gordon, I think the bees are probably just taking off.
Okay.
Yeah, we've just seen the bees take out of the pen. As predicted, Kevin Flood like a freight train out of there, front of the pack with the rest of the bees. So I'm not sure if the numbers that we're seeing, so when it says, 8th place out of 62, if that's the total riders or the B category riders, but it looks like a decent portion of people here. So you'd expect them to be able to at least sort of pull together in some fashion and put down some big numbers here. So with a group this big, I'd be expecting them to roll across this desert at, maybe 44, 43 kilometers an hour, probably the whole way. So I suspect that they're going to roll up on those C riders, probably around 1 lap in or thereabouts. So Kevin just sticking in the pack here, obviously going to try and not burn too many matches just before we get to the sprint points. I don't think from the sounds of it he's going to try and contest those intermediate sprints too much, but he's definitely going to be happy to pick up some points if they're there for him. But as we said before, it's just going to be a case of sitting in, trying to conserve as much energy as possible and outlast as many people as he can. So James, how's Paul looking?
Paul's looking really good. He's putting out fantastic numbers and hanging around, probably averaging around about 300 watts at the moment. He's hanging in towards the front of this extremely large group. We've only got 2 outrunners out in front of this group, and they're probably got a gap of around about, I'd say, 5 to 10 seconds, but they're almost in touching distance. So the size of this group, they could very easily catch, especially on a course like this. Obviously, pan flat. I mean, we're doing one of the hilliest parts of this route at the moment with gradients 1%. So that probably says a lot. So quickly, just switch back to Ed and find out how he's settled in. Ed Finney, are you there?
Yeah, sorry about that. I had a phone call come through. All right, so I'm in the second group. We're about 32 seconds behind that first group. That Paul Cusack said. About 10 of us just settling in here. It's a big jump, so just hang with this group and try and see what I can do on sprints. I'm not the best sprinter in the world, so we'll see how this race goes. Thanks.
Good work so far, Ed. Thanks. Gordon, how's Stefan getting on? Is he powering out in front?
More of it was. He's still pushing out at sort of 280 watts. The gap behind closed slightly, but not by much. 37, 41 seconds the riders behind. So pretty much managing to hold that gap. Front group, which I think are probably made up of mostly B and C riders that are in the deep end. So they're about 40 seconds ahead. So I think we can discount them. They'll probably be disqualified at the end of the day. So Stefan at the moment, I'd say he's in the virtual race lead. Whether that gap holds behind him, I reckon he can just keep that power output for. I suspect this for a Cat D rider, this race will probably take just over an hour, which is another 50 minutes riding. So I suspect his plan will just be to hold that power, which he's very good at. He's had many gold trophies in Cat D already, so I suspect it'll be exactly the same. He'll just hold down this power, see how we get on. The only chance probably for the riders behind is if they push on the hills a wee bit, but as you suggested there's not many hills. So there's maybe a 1 minute, 2 minute climb out the desert, and then 30 seconds back out the water tunnels. So not much of a chance advantage for groups behind to push on the hills, but time will tell. At the moment, it's just a TT effort here. Still holding 280 watts, so he's looking very good as he's doing.
Jake, what's going on? I'm guessing towards the front of the base.
Yeah, so Kevin's sat quite close to the front actually. Doing a little bit more work than I was expecting this early on, but I suspect that that's not necessarily by design, but by circumstance, as people are pushing quite hard. It doesn't look that fluid at the minute, so we're seeing little gaps open and then sort of close again. Everybody's sort of staying in a rough peloton, but it doesn't look like there's any cohesion so far. Very difficult, obviously, to try and communicate between all these different riders. So it's not as simple as sort of taking turns on the front, rolling through, having a pull, and then rolling back to the back of the peloton and kind of like keeping the speed up in terms of utilizing their power to the max. It's just not possible in a ride like this. You can't do it. There's no Discord channel. Texts in game will come through, but they'll be quite sporadic, and obviously people are working quite hard, so it's quite difficult to try and reach everybody and communicate. So you're kind of seeing that here, and the speed from the groups dipped a little bit. It was 48 kilometers per hour recently, and it's only 45 now on the flat. So you can tell that they're not really working that well together. Plenty of time though. We're only 5 minutes in, about 3.9k, only 6 meters of elevation. So lots of time for them to sort of come together. I suspect that once you have the initial start to the Zwift race that you usually get where people are blasting it, trying to go as hard as they can, after the first 10 minutes, things tend to settle down. So I'm expecting to see that here as we'll sort of see these riders try and conserve a little bit of energy and not just pull away as hard as they can. But no attacks so far. Nobody's even attempted to get away on the front massively. I think there's been a couple of little probes, but generally speaking, people are quite happy to just sit here and roll in the draft of this big group. It'd be suicide almost to go off so early. I can see that the lead for the C group riders has dropped down by about 40 seconds to about 4 minutes 20 for the main peloton there. So that's about 40 seconds in 5.5, 6 minutes. I'd expect that to be accurate, that we'll see them sort of come together maybe just after the first lap is over. But plenty of incentive for the C riders to try and keep together and keep pushing. They'll have to do everything they can, I think, and there can't really be any slip-ups. They can't start turning around and looking at each other and kind of expecting each other to do the work. Gordon, what do you think? Are you expecting to see that? Are they working well together at the minute? Do you think they're going to be able to stay ahead of the B riders? What do you think?
So I've not had a good look at the C riders. I'm following Stefan at the moment, which is a D rider, and he's completely on a TT effort at the moment, which he's doing absolutely great on. And the D riders behind him aren't really catching. Just if I check the groups back to the C, which are still probably a couple of K back down the road. And I suspect that it'll take a while to catch. I think they probably will. I think the danger for Stefan is whether that big group of C riders catch up with the main peloton and Ds and maybe push them back up.
How far ahead of the D riders of the C currently?
So the Ds are split into a few groups there. I suspect the sort of front of the Cs to the back of the Ds are probably about 1 kilometre apart. At the moment, Stefan on the road, let's have a look, is about 11k, and looking at the main group, trying to spot where the C group are.
I think they're at about 8.5, yeah. So just a couple of K ahead, about 3.
He's got a few K to go, and Stefan's at the front of the Ds, and that group behind is not really catching. He's just coming out the desert now, over the hills.
I'm seeing a lead of around about 3.5 minutes between Stefan and the front C.
So that'll be interesting. It could be quite close with that gap, because that's 17, 18 minutes been riding now, so it
Sounds
could
like
come
they will
down
come
very
together.
close at the end.
Yeah, they're going to come together, I think. And if they're not going to come together, it's going to be very, very close. Incentive for everybody to keep working hard. We'll expect the drama to come a little bit later in this stage. So we'll be keeping you updated, trying to give you a live feed as to how these groups are moving together rather than the individuals together at the early stages of this race. And, you can see those gaps coming down already. So I'd expect them to come down significantly by the end of the first half of the first lap, as we approach just over the halfway mark of the race. So James, how are things looking with Paul in C?
Yeah, good timing actually. So we've just gone past a roundabout, and we've got one of our relatively few possible attack points in the course, where we've got a little 3 to 5% climb out of the desert, just as we start heading north again to complete the loop. It's looking pretty, we're definitely seeing some big numbers now. So Paul's putting down 500 plus watts to make sure he stays with the group, and we are stringing out a little bit, not massively. But yeah, no, it looks like we're going to. Actually, I'm going to take that all back, because Paul's just pulled off the front a little bit, and he's opened up a 1 second lead. So this, could it be a big push? I think realistically, he's going to need to open up 5-10 seconds to have any chance of getting away from the huge group behind him, because the hill's only relatively short, doesn't really give you that much of a chance. But the group's a little bit strung out behind, but I suspect it's going to all come back together again. One of the things that I did want to mention is that I've seen some of the beta footage of Zwift's new plans to ensure that racers enter in the correct category. So I mentioned earlier that we had a couple of people off the front, and when I was looking at them a couple of minutes ago, they're both doing 5 and 4 watts a kilo, which is obviously outside the category limits for the C riders. So obviously, sometimes we get people who accidentally, or for some reason deliberately, choose to enter a category below the one they should probably be entering into. So Zwift are trying to combat that at the moment, and looking at the some of the beta trials that are going on at the moment. There were a couple of so when you go to enter the event on the game itself, it'll tell you that maybe you shouldn't be entering this category. Maybe you need to rethink it. Zwift has said they have an idea from people's 1 and 5 minute power what category you should be entering into. So let's say I tried to enter a D, it might tell me that maybe I'm a little bit too strong for the Ds and I should be entering the Cs. And also in game, if you enter into the wrong category and you are flying off the front, then you may receive the green cone of shame and a little warning message before you are actually slowed down on the field to bring you back down to a pace of D. So it's great to see the some of developments taking place to try and make racing a fairer place. But in the meantime, here in Category C, Paul's being joined again by the group, and we are 12 kilometres in with another 24 to go. Gordon, is Stefan still blazing away at front?
He's still blazing away. Same again. He's doing 300, even up to 320 watts per kilo. He's pretty much sitting in TT mode. He must be by now. That front group's certainly pulled away a minute, or they've even split up. They're at least a minute ahead. So I think we can discount them for the moment. The group behind is still showing a 50-second gap. So he's doing very well now, 14k in. Plus, we think he could do this to the very end. So it would just be interesting to see what he decides to do for the sprint section. Obviously, being a solo rider, he's got a bit of a disadvantage when it comes to sprint. There's no draft. A big peloton you could draft through and get quite an advantage on a sprint. So that's an interesting choice, whether you want to stay ahead on your own, whether it's a good idea, or whether you're better sitting in a group to give you a better chance at a sprint. Because certainly the group behind, I've not seen the full size of it, but there's at least, I think it's probably the whole of the Ds, there's probably 20 or 30 riders in the peloton behind them, but they're not catching at the moment. So it just depends at the end how the sprint points work out. obviously 3 sprints on the all the way round, so it's quite heavily weighted to get into a good points on the sprint, not just overall GC. But totally on his own at the moment, but is holding the gap, looking very good. And, doing very well at the moment, just pushing out the water tunnel. So approaching probably 3/4 way around this first lap. At the moment, I don't see anyone getting close to him for the gold medal in D. But yeah, how's the action going on behind?
Yeah, everything's looking great here so far. Kevin sitting in very, very comfortably. Speaking of sprints, I would strongly recommend, if you were going for the sprint, to sit at the back of the peloton, get as far back at that group as you can, try and utilise the draft as you just suggested, Gordon. Way more effective to increase your speed from back and accelerate past people, give you at least a second. And a sprint like that, maybe even 2, save you a little bit of power, especially if you're trying to sit in the group and tail off afterwards. But I mention that because I've been reliably informed by our video judges that Kevin Flood himself has won the first sprint on the lead-in, followed closely by Max Szymanski. So great results there from some of our favourites. Kevin going for the sprints, despite what we spoke about earlier, and he snuck a win in there. So yeah, that's 20 points for Kevin. Really good effort there. Can't say fairer than that, especially because he's still at the front of this group, ploughing away as hard as he can. Went down big numbers. It's 4.8 at the minute. These guys aren't messing around. They're really working hard on the front. You can see in big numbers of about 5.0, 4.8 of maybe 4, possibly even 5 riders on the front. Then followed slightly behind by people about 4.0. So really, really going fast, this group. 43 kilometers an hour, whilst going up an incline is not insignificant. Kevin's heart rate looking about 166 here, so he's not on the threshold, but he's working hard. He was doing some reasonable power of about 280 watts there, but dipped down a little bit now as the power saps out and he drops a bit further back behind the group to utilise some of that draft and let some of the other guys pull a bit harder to try and catch those C riders. The gap looks like it's dropped down to what I can see looks to 2 minutes 15 seconds to Ole Kobilecki in C. So I'm not sure if he's in the peloton, but it looks like he probably is. So that gap is coming down even quicker now. So we're on the minus 2% because those guys' speeds just dipped up even higher to about 55 kph. So really, really getting some momentum here. And Kevin hasn't really dropped below 4.0 for the last minute or so from the looks of it. So these guys, even at the back of that group, are very, very hard on a descent. Those are massive numbers. These guys aren't messing around. They're really coming for those C riders. James, what do you think? Is Paul going to be able to stay away? How are the other guys working? Are they able to cohesively take turns, or is it all a bit of a mess?
Yeah, thanks, Jake. Just before I come to that, I just want to quickly touch on the time gaps between the categories. So if we look at the front of the Bs and the front of the Cs, we are looking at a gap still of around about probably 4.5 minutes from the front of the Cs up to Stefan at the front of the Ds. We are looking at around about 2.5, maybe a little bit more. So the catching is definitely happening. In terms of how Paul's getting on, it's a little bit more strung out now. We've still got a big group, and just to touch on a few herd names we've got on here. So we've obviously got Paul, got Connor Pollock, and we have Jeff Pearson, and Dennis Wade is just a little bit behind as well. But still a big group. In terms of Zwift Power, we're looking at probably, I guess, 6 or 7, but the group on the screen is probably more like 10, 15. But yeah, rotating the turns quite well. But there are little gaps appearing, and it looks like Paul might be just struggling to hang on to the back of a group at the moment. He's still pushing down big numbers to try and get back on, but he might need a little bit of help. But having said that, I think he might just be coming back. But so we are out the tunnel not long before we start to head east again towards the jungle and the little 3% climb. So I say jungle, I mean desert. The little 3% climb to get us there. But check back in a few minutes, and we could all be one group, or we could have a little bit of a split. So let's just switch quickly back to Gordon.
Yep, so pretty much as we were, I thought maybe the group behind were catching a wee bit. Lost a bit. What's happened? There's a couple of sea riders right at the very front. Hadn't spotted them. They didn't look like they're on Swift Power, but so they look like they've actually caught up most of the D group and gone past the D group. I suspect they have dropped the main D peloton, so it's just a couple of sea riders, which will be interesting to see whether they're even going too fast for Stefan, or maybe he can jump on their wheel and get an even bigger advantage from them. So a couple of sea riders about 30 seconds back at the moment, catching. The main D peloton looks to be holding just under a minute, so they're not really catching much time at the moment. We're still pushing out the same power, 300 watt. As we're coming round, we're probably 1k again from the sprint section, so it'll be interesting to see what he does this time. Looking at the results in Swift Power, I think Stefan might have got the sprint on the first time round, so that'll be interesting to see if he managed to get that and the release win overall. It would be doing very well, just to see what he can do in the next two sprint sections. But if he can get a half decent result on the two sprints, I don't see anyone catching him overall, but time will tell. At the moment, absolutely just a TT effort, still pushing out 280, 300 watts, and the peloton don't seem to be catching at all. But next chance will probably when the main C group come up. I suspect some of the fast D riders might try and jump on to close down that gap, but time will tell. About 500, 600 metres from the start of the sprint section, but no sign of pushing up the power just yet, but he might as well reserve his energy for that long sprint. 500 metres is not what I'd call a sprint. It's a bit too much long for me, so we'll have to wait and see. But how the C group, are they got any sight of the D peloton yet? How far back do they look?
No, quite a way still, and we have all regrouped after the climb out of the tunnel. So back to our group of probably 15, 20 riders. In terms of how far away they are, so they're picking up the odd straggler towards the back of the D group, but so we've got the C's, and they are about 2 minutes behind Stefan, so that's probably about a minute and a half behind the main peloton still. So I would expect them to catch this lap, but probably not until maybe the second half. But all the herd riders still pushing well. Go on, Gordon.
Just jumping briefly, that's Stefan going for the sprint section now. He doesn't appear to be pushing it too much. He's still doing the usual sort of 2.5, 2.6 watts, so he's maybe not going full out on that one, especially I think the peloton behind get their act together. They start to take some points back from the sprint, but just as he's closing the end of the sprint, there's these two C riders coming through, so I'll just give it 10 seconds, see if he gets on, but don't suspect he will get on. They're pushing 4 or 5 watts, which is probably too much for Stefan. Yeah, the gap's gone out to 10 seconds already, so he's just going to carry on as he was, but I suspect a D group behind, if they push, they can certainly gain up some points on that sprint overall from him. So it'll be interesting at the end of this race how the points work out with a combination of sprint and overall race. So yeah, how's the B group there doing, Jake? Are they split up? Or are they all still going together?
Well, we're a little bit smaller, this group now. We've had a couple of people sort of tail off, but I think that's mainly attrition. It's been not a case of people attacking, but the pace is just very, very high, and some of those lower-end B riders, or perhaps the lighter ones like myself, will be struggling to keep that sort of power up for what is now an over 20-minute TT effort, essentially. We're at 16.1k. I've just had a quick look on Zwift Power. I can confirm that Max Szymanski's doing 3.8 watts per kilo and Kevin's doing 3.9. So, not insignificant numbers there. That's top end B numbers, approaching very much the A category. So, these guys aren't messing around. I was under the impression that I may see more riders sort of sitting in here and trying to play the long game and just sort of potentially attack the sprints and just sort of do as little work as possible. But everybody in this group seems to be doing a minimum of 3.6 watts per kilo for over 20 minutes. So
just going to jump in quickly, Jake. We've got a bit of sprint action here with Paul putting down about 800 watts, and they are properly going for it. Hooray! Paul's going to finish behind C. Pollock, the other herd rider, and they have properly hammered down the last 200 meters of that second sprint. So Paul, I'm pretty certain Paul came second of that sprint with C. Pollock. I'm very sorry, I can't remember your first name, but C. Pollock looks to have taken the second sprint and the 25 points that are on offer, with Paul taking 24. So great to have a bit of a nice bit of action mid-ride. I suspect they'll all come back together. Sorry for jumping in, Jake. Please carry on.
No worries. So just out of curiosity, James, what distance was the sprint there?
I think the banner was 19.7.
Great stuff. So I'll keep my eyes peeled for that. Yeah, everything's looking great so far. Just saying basically that we've got, you know, really strong riders here pulling this group, and you know, not insignificant numbers. So we've literally just hoovered up our first riders, in fact, who look to be a few riders dropped off from C category. I think there's about 5 of them. So the first remnants of the C category peloton, who are probably finding that pace a bit high there, showing that the C riders themselves aren't messing around. They're not taking it easy. They want to catch the D riders. They don't want to get caught. So everybody has something to ride for here, not just a case of you know, if you get caught, it's over. You're still able to catch other categories. You're still going to be racing for the GC points and the sprint. So plenty on offer here. It's not, as I thought it might be initially, a case of people sort of sitting in and not doing too much and not making it too exciting. So plenty of time here. We were about 30 seconds away from another group of C riders, a bigger group of C riders caught. So I suspect this is the beginning of B riders.
Just quickly on the C's. So Connor Pollock has actually, after his big effort in the sprint, has dropped off this main group. Group's thinned down to, I'd say, probably about 10, and Paul is trying really hard to get back on it. I think he's probably going to manage it to give him a very good chance of points for the GC, as well as an effort on the last sprint. He's just putting down a little sprint now. Maybe someone should tell him it's the wrong part of the race, but he's just managed to sprint back onto the group, into a group of, like I say, probably 10 or so. So it's definitely thinned out quite a bit now. We're 21 kilometers into the race now, well over half distance, and we will see how things pan out from here. But it's looking set for the rather predicted sprint finish, but it was definitely great to see some action in the middle of this race with a well-contested sprint. So quickly back to Gordon and Stefan.
Yeah, pretty much as we were. It's just sort of at the, I don't know what you call it, the desert oasis pit, going through the middle up the great 1% incline. So 54 seconds to the group behind. They're not getting near. I didn't catch them going for the sprint, so I'm not quite sure if they went through that sprint at any pace, judging that the gap's not really reduced at all. I suspect most of them probably didn't sprint, as we saw, unlike the C group, which certainly some of them made an effort to put a sprint in. But at the moment, still 50 seconds gap, still holding the same power, between about 280 to 320 watts. So power's not dropping, gap's not dropping. It's like he's got gold place for the race sealed. It just depends what happens with the sprint. First time round, I wasn't quite sure how he got on. He certainly pushed a wee bit, so I think he'll get some good points for that. But
Stefan definitely won the sprint in the first lap.
Okay, so I mean that's probably first sprint in the first lap and overall race winner by looks of it. So that's given him at least 50 points out of the 100 available. Whether he manages to get anything for the next two.
First guy through doesn't necessarily mean won the sprint.
No, Zwift Power was saying that he won the sprint time wise.
Okay.
Speaking of which, Mr. Finney, how are you getting on?
Oh, I'm just dandy. I beat all my guys in the sprint. My 15 group of 15, but we're all back together doing about 40. Picking up stragglers here and there. Group of 3 or 4 in front of us. We're going to eat in a minute. So doing fine. You know, just kind of stuck in this group at this point. So it is what it is. Back to you.
Yeah, just on Paul's group, I just saw a glimpse of what appears to be the D peloton. Or certainly a good chunk of the D riders, and to be honest, I'm just looking at Zwift Power. It looks like the very vast majority. Well, I think pretty much everyone apart from
pretty much all of them.
Yeah, so pretty much everyone there, and the gap's down to about 15-20 seconds between the front C's and D peloton. So I could see if any of them are able to jump onto this group swelling a little bit, but the pace might be a bit too fast. But certainly a good opportunity for any of the D riders to jump on and try and hang in that group for as long as possible to give them a little bit of a gap against their competitors. So be interesting to see how this one pans out. Gordon, how far ahead is Stefan now?
So the gap's holding, still about 50 seconds. As you said there, it'll be interesting what happens when the large C group hits into the B group. What I suspect will happen is it'll just get sort of split in two. Some of the faster T riders, I can see some that are maybe capable of holding 2.7, 2.8 for 20 minutes at best. They might manage to hang on to that C group. And then it'll be interesting to see whether Stefan manages to keep away from them, because that'll be more of a challenge there, to keep away from the fast C riders that might be dragging D's up as well. So that might give him a bit of competition for the overall. But we're approaching now nearly 24 kilometres, 40 minutes into this race. There's probably about another, I'd say about 25 minutes possibly left, maybe even a wee bit less. So catching up that minute won't be quick, even if you're a C rider. So time will tell. If they push the hills, it may close it if they work together. But sometimes riders work together, sometimes they like to attack each other. So plenty to go, and certainly the C riders, they don't have anyone in front of them to chase for, so there's not much incentive for them to catch Stefan other than just pushing their own group along. Maybe some of the D riders might try and help out as well, but at the moment, sitting 52 seconds, 24.5 kilometres in, we'll tell. I mean, once we push out the desert, I think it'll be a good point to see if they're even getting close. They need to be at least probably down to 30 seconds, I'd say, by the time we're hitting the tunnels for them to catch up, otherwise they will just power away. Overall, I mean, Stefan's power is certainly equivalent to what a C rider might put out, 290. What's he still doing at the moment? But gap's still holding, 51, 52 seconds, and time will tell. But yeah, how are we going up at the front? Has any more action in the Bs? Is there any splits or anything of interest?
No, so apologies there. I'm not sure if people heard me call the sprint. I had reports that I wasn't audible then, so apologies. But if you did not catch that, Kevin took first place in the sprint yet again, another 25 points. So that gives him, by my calculations, and I got a C at GCSE Maths, 50 points, which is massive. That's over half the points that are available today. So if he can get another 25 points on the next sprint, wow, and then something in the GC, he'll be miles ahead of everybody else. So really clever stuff from Kevin, really tactically astute and playing the long game here. So he could be a massive favourite B rider title from week 2, which is really, really good stuff to see him stretch that lead out. So really rooting for Kevin here. He's sat in and he's just sort of covering at the back of this group. I saw him dip straight back down to 2 watts per kilo after the sprint, which is, I'm impressed he didn't drop from this group when I've done that sprint before. Because it's so long and it's so brutal, especially if you're trying to race people to get points, you kind of tail off afterwards, and it'll take you a few seconds of just recovering, let alone jumping straight onto a group of riders that are doing basically 4 watts per kilo. So really, really good stuff from Kevin, and he's playing this beautifully. So I think that this group is going to be coming up to a further group of riders, from what I can tell, they're about a minute ahead, so potentially not too much longer left on the road for some of these C riders to get swept up, but that in itself will create a really interesting dynamic. We'll get to see how they interact as an even bigger peloton, and will D's be able to stay further ahead. So, James, how's we're getting on? About 1 minute 15 ahead?
Yeah, holding steady in this group. So we have overtaken the main D peloton. A couple of Ds are hanging in there and making up some nice progress against their other competitors. But we are about I'd say probably about a kilometre away from the roundabout before we got the climb out of the desert. So still 10 kilometres away from the final sprint, but we could see some action on the last climb. We'll have to wait and see, but that'll be in another, I'd say, probably a couple of minutes' time. Just what I have noticed is Stefan is now only 30 seconds in front of this C group. So whilst we've all kept our fingers crossed he'll be able to stay away, it might be a bit of a challenge. But if he keeps on powering down, who knows? But I think that'll be definitely towards the end. But he's doing a great job so far. Gordon, any more insight?
Yeah, as you say there, that gap seems to be closing. It's down to about 30 seconds now, and we've not even hit the incline out of the desert, so I'm pretty sure he's going to get caught up here. Looking at the group behind, I do spy a couple of D riders in it. G. Flynn, and there's a couple more further back, so it looks like he might have a bit of competition for the overall win if the D riders manage to hold on to D peloton, which this gap's coming down pretty fast. It's 29 seconds now, just as we're approaching the bottom of the incline out the desert. I suspect by the top of this hill it might be even down to 15 or 10 seconds, and they'll flood past. But I suspect he's got the power as well to hold in with this peloton. So if you can keep an eye out for the other D riders in the group, that'll be a competition now. See if I can get any, if they are on Zwift Power, will be noticed as well. He potentially maybe got lucky. The D riders that I can see in the peloton, I can't see them on Zwift Power, so he might be okay at the moment. But there's certainly a couple of the Ds have been dragged up with the Cs as we thought might happen. But even at the bottom of this hill, it's 18 seconds. I suspect he's actually going to get caught before he hits the top of the hill. The C group pushing out 4 or 5 watts a kilo. They're probably doing their own attacks as well. They've got nothing to race Stefan for. They're just pushing against each other, trying to drop them. So down to 14 seconds, he's going to get caught before the top of this hill. But best idea for him is just sit up slightly for a couple of seconds and jump on the C train as well. And actually, even if it comes to the end, good opportunity to draft and get a good sprint time for extra sprint points. But going to get caught at the moment. We'll see if he manages to hold on to that group. It looks like even the Ds that have managed to hold on to the C group are now getting distanced a wee bit. So it could be an advantage for him if the main C peloton comes through. He sits on their wheel, and that gap back to the Ds might open up again. I suspect is what we'll find just as he reaches the top of the hill. If he can hold with this C group over the top of the hill, I think he'll be all right. But we'll see in 5-10 minutes if he manages to hold on to that wheel.
Yeah. So Paul's done another great job up the 5% hill, which was literally about a minute ago. He's just dropping off the back a little bit now, but I expect him to pull it back in. I mean, he's one of the heavier riders, so the hill certainly going up won't be his friend. We've got a slight decline now where he should hopefully be able to jump back onto this group, and he's only about 5 meters off now, so I expect him to be able to jump back on in the next 30 seconds or so. But still putting out big numbers, seeing lots of 300s and 400s. But is this group just pulling away? But they might just be. So hopefully he can get back on. But check back in a couple of minutes, and I'll be able to tell you. So quickly switching back to Jake.
So just been having a quick look at the numbers on Zwift Power, and actually the pace of this B group's dropped a little bit. So Max's power's gone down to 3.6 and Kevin's dropped a little bit to 3.8. So slight drop off there. Feels a little bit slower. Feels like these guys aren't attacking this with the same sort of urgency that they were before. Potentially they feel like they're closing in on the C riders and they don't need to burn too many matches to do it, as it's a bit of an inevitability. But just looking at the times here, they are approximately 1 minute 20 ahead. Man on the field, Ed Finney. So Ed, giving you a little bit of reconnaissance there. They're about 1 minute 30 ahead. How are you feeling?
All right, heading up the hill. My group of 15 or so. I'm here with No Guts and Gurley are right with me too. Doing all right. Staying in the front of my little pack. And let's see how it goes.
Is everyone working together? Are you rolling turns, or how is it working?
No, well, there's a few maniacs that stay out in the front, and I'm happy to sit in on. So
that sounds like a good race tactic to me.
Yeah.
Good work, Ed.
Right.
We'll catch up with you soon.
Thanks.
Just dropping back in Stefan there briefly. He's now been caught up with the C riders as we fought going over the hill, but it looks like he's settled in nicely into the group, so he's certainly not been dropped by them, and probably now distancing the rest of the Ds. But looking at the D peloton behind it, it looks to be sort of smashed into quite a few multiple parts, whereas for the first 3 quarters of the race they were sticking together. I think that pace of the C group coming through has just pulled some of them up and pushed some of them back, and it certainly looks very spread out. But Stefan again is now settled into that group, which looks doing very well. I suspect that will take him right the way round to the finish line, and then if he can get a sprint in, he's looking good for possibly a first place in the league for today's race.
So Paul has actually been dropped now. He's about 10 seconds behind that group that Gordon's been watching with Stefan and the leading Cs. But what could be quite interesting is because I think Paul probably came third in the first sprint and second in the first. So that's 23 for the first sprint, 24. So 47 points out of a possible 50. Now, he's probably looking... he's in complete no man's land at the moment with 10 seconds behind, 10 seconds in front. So he's probably looking about eighth or ninth in the GC. So that'll give him about 18 points. I suspect he's probably saving himself a little bit for the last sprint as well. He's on Paul to take the win in Category C with the points he's picked up on the sprint. But he's got just under the 6K to go. Just in the tunnel at the moment before we got the climb out of the tunnel, before we swing east back into the desert. Then we've got the loop and then the sprint. So not long to go now. Jake, what's going on the bees?
So we're just on a slight descent here, 55 kph. The guys are drilling it pretty hard. I've just seen Dan Poynton, who's brother of Ben Poynton, Great White Shark alumni, at TTT and Friday nights, is doing some work on the front. So a few names that we recognise there. Everybody seems to be gelling quite well now. It looks like people are sort of potentially not formally but informally just sort of taking a go on the front, rolling off a little bit and sticking together. Although we have seen a little bit of a split there just behind. There's potentially a group of what looks to be about 5 or 10 riders that have just split off the back here, but we're approaching D riders right ahead. We're just about to merge with a group of, I think, possibly even up to about 8, 9 D riders from what I can tell. So this group's getting bigger all the time. The question is, are any of those riders going to be able to hang on? That's the question when you get swept up. Is obviously the group that's coming and sweeping you is moving at a very quick speed, and they tend to be riders that are stronger. So is anybody able to sprint on after they've been dropped and sort of jump onto that group for a free draft and potentially get towed back up and may even catch up with the group they got dropped from it? They play it carefully, but we're seeing this spread out here as we hit the descent of -6% going into the tunnel of the sea, and potentially here we might have a bit of a split. People are going to have to be very careful. It looks like Max Szymanski's just on the right side of that split. Just Kevin's doing okay there. He's settled safely into the middle of the pack. Very astute, knows exactly where he is at all times and won't let anything like that happen. Dan Poynton there as well. So a couple of C riders in that group that have managed to tag on, and possibly even a D rider I can see there as well. So this dynamic could get interesting now as this group gets bigger every second as we pass riders all the time that have been dropped. Solo riders, a couple of 1 or 2 bunched riders, but be very, very interesting to see when we hit this group of C. It looks like Ed's now only got about 45-second advantage on these guys, so I'll expect him to come into view quite shortly. There's not really going to be much he can do about that if he's in a group of, I think he said, about 10 riders, so there's going to be very little his group's going to be able to keep this pack at bay. Then it's going to be a case of are the D riders going to be able to hold on? The C riders, it looks like Ed is in the peloton. That is the group of C riders. So once they're caught, there will be no C riders further ahead. I think there's potentially 1, maybe 2 solo riders I can see that are spread out, but then it's just going to be the Ds. Are the Ds going to be able to stay ahead? And it's interesting. They've got at the minute what looks to be a 2-minute lead, but we're approaching the last 5 kilometers. This is going to be very, very tight. I suspect the pace is going to go up. We're at 45 kph here on the flat, and these guys are going to start to sense blood in the water. They're going to realize they've only got a limited amount of time to try and make this catch, and they're going to have to start to work together and increase the pace little by little before it's too late. Gordon, Stefan, the Ds, do you think they're going to be able to do it? Are they going to be able to stay ahead?
It's getting close. So Stefan actually got dropped off that main C group coming out the tunnel. It's on the little incline gap at the moment. Just trying to check. It's probably about 10 or 15 seconds. The main D and I think it's possibly a couple of C peloton are just going across the wooden bridge back into the desert. And it's just updating now. Obviously, the gaps are a bit different when it hits the incline, which it's showing to the main peloton about a minute, but there's a couple of D riders floating around in between. not working too well. A couple of C's and D's, but I think the main peloton won't catch him. So he's still looking good for that first place in D. If he maybe save a bit of energy, put in a decent sprint as well, he should get a good overall points and high chance that he might take the overall win, which will give him the 50 points towards the league. I don't believe Stefan did last weekend's race, so I'm not quite sure if he's got any points yet, but certainly this looks like a good start for him, and certainly perfect course. But again, back on his TT effort, which been doing for pretty much most of the race, apart from that C group coming through. But he's dropped the power a wee bit now, whether he's thinking going for the sprint or just letting anyone catch him. But time will tell. We've probably got about 3 to 4k left. Looking like he's going to finish just under the hour, which is a pretty fast time as well for 2 laps of this course. But yeah,
so it looks like he's about 55 seconds ahead of the second place D rider. So yeah, if he keeps that pace up and doesn't let that gap decrease, then he's going to walk away with it. There's a couple of D riders ahead of him on Zwift Power, but they're sandbaggers by the looks of it. They're entering the wrong category. So Stefan is miles ahead at the minute.
Great like the look of it. As you suggest, they've held over 3 watts a kilo for 50 odd minutes now, so I think we can discount this. Certainly looks like he's on for first place, and no one's going to catch him from behind. So if I were him,
they're B riders by the looks of it.
Sit up and wait for the sprint and try and grab as many points as they can then.
James, how are things looking with Paul?
Yeah, not too bad. Just a couple of things. I think the C riders that you were seeing, Jake, I think they were originally the second group in the C race. Obviously now the front group's a bit more splintered. Paul is now about 45, 50 seconds off the very front C group, but he's only 10 seconds behind Stefan, and can now actually just see him just going under the very tall bridge in the desert. So we're now down to the last 2 kilometers, only 9 seconds behind Stefan at the moment. So these two may join up just before the end, but we are probably maybe 2.5, 3 minutes away from the last bit of action for for Paul, and probably Stefan as well. Gap down to 8 seconds now. So, Gordon, very, very quickly, just back to you.
Yeah, as you see, you suggested there that was Paul just behind about 7 seconds. Stefan's doing exactly as he was, still pushing out over 300 watts, as he has done all race. Must have about, I reckon, 2k to go from here. So, just waiting to see if he puts in a bit of a sprint effort in a couple of minutes' time, and that'll be his race over. Certainly to the overall first in D, and a good points for the first sprint. I'm not sure about the second sprint through. He certainly didn't seem to push it, and I'm not sure if the peloton behind did. So we've got one more sprint opportunity to grab some more points, but I think he's got a high chance of maybe taking the overall win from the race today. We'll have to wait and see. Sometimes the sprint points take a while to come through, but it's just interesting. I don't know if Paul will quite catch him. It's a 7-second gap now. I suspect he might catch him just in time we get for a sprint, which could be help Stefan on the sprint as well, having a bit of a draft. Obviously, for the last lap, he had no one to sprint with him, no advantage on the draft, which even if you're not fully sprinting, sitting in a peloton and going at its pace, you're going to have a big advantage over a rider alone trying to sprint. So,
I was just thinking that Stefan actually could give Paul a really nice target on the on the sprint, and Paul's actually just been overtaken by a D rider called what was Bottom, no longer is, and he's flying along at 4 watts a kilo. So I'd say there's a reasonable chance that he's possibly entered the wrong category.
Possibly. I don't see him on Zwift Power, so Stefan's realised that as well. There's nothing to worry about, or maybe at the point that we're at, we're just a couple hundred metres from the sprint. He could even use him as part of a draft to help him on the sprint. So I wouldn't be worried about Wasp Bottom, and I'd just try to sit on his wheel and maybe get an advantage because he is pushing out 4 watts, something even 5 watts a kilo just to get past him. He's flying past him now at the start of the sprint sec. So we'll just give it a second, see if Stefan puts down any extra power, whether he's just going to tee to the end. Doesn't appear to be putting much more. He's still holding sort of the 270, 280 watts. So maybe a bit of an opportunity for the other D riders if they push it then to grab some points back off him. But he's certainly be in the running for the first place overall. But time will tell because it's a bit unsure at the moment who will be getting the sprint points, certainly for the second and third time through that sprint banner. But being out on his outer zone, he's not really encouraged to sprint unless he knows the points are coming. So he's just holding 2.6, 2.7 doesn't appear to be sprinting, so he's
Paul-
certainly
Paul-
not going to get first.
Paul just behind him is having a sort of what appeared to be a relatively tired sprint, and after 36k, I don't blame him one bit. But he's just gone past Stefan and just over the line, and Stefan will just be crossing the line as well. Let's just quickly switch back to Manimal Course. Ed Finney, how's it going back there, Ed?
Oh, lovely. About a little less than a kilometer. Stretching it out here. People coming up on the sprint pretty soon here. I'm quite a ways back in the group.
It looks like is that a mixture of the C and the B group that's all merged together now, coming up to the final?
Don't know what
Kevin,
we have here.
Kevin's on you, Ed.
What's that?
Kevin's group's about 30 meters behind you. I think they've got about 6 seconds. So they're going to come up to the sprint with you, and this is all going to be everybody sprint at the same time. This is going to be absolute carnage. I think we're going to have 40, maybe 50 people. Ed, do you have anything left?
We'll see. I'm going to give it a little bit here.
We're with you, my man. Give it your best shot. This is coming up now as we're into the sprint. So Kevin's going to have to give it everything he can. We're about 300 meters out here, approaching the archway. So this is going to be really, really fast. I can see orange numbers on the screen. Oh, people are starting to go as possibly sitting in the back of the pack. He's doing his best he can. He's taking the advice on the draft in front. Oh, and he's trying to open it up here. You can tell he doesn't have loads left in the tank. He's just trying to get into the top 20. Is he going to do it? It's hard to tell. No, I think he's at the back of that group. Really, really strong effort from Kevin. He's definitely taken maximum points there in terms of the sprints in the first two sprints. He's got at least 50 points, so really good effort. Ed, how did you get on?
It was okay. It's like I finished 30th. Jeez.
Nothing wrong with that. I'm sure there's only going to be about 10 of them on Zwift Power, so you'll have scored some points there. Really good work.
I think Ed, I saw your name in the sprint leaderboard. I think you were top 10 in there as well. So I think that was from the second lap round. So great job there, and great job to all our riders tonight. Firstly, big thanks to Ed Finney for being on Manimal Course again, and also to Kevin Flood, Paul Husak, and Stéphane Poirier. For allowing us to follow them tonight. Thanks to my co-commentary team of Jake Sanderson and Gordon Sloan, and also a big thanks to Damon for providing the pictures that you're able to see tonight. So thank you also everyone for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the coverage tonight, and we hope to see you again this time next week. Thank you very much, and good night.